welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And friends, we are back in Calloway County with workers' compensation attorney Jeff Roberts. Jeff, how are you, guy?
I'm doing good, Jim. How are you?
Buddy, I'm doing fine. Glad to be with you again. Let's jump into a topic that I think might actually kind of surprise people. But the title is going to be, is your condition actually work-related? And I know a lot of doctors are out there. They're really good at what they do, and they're helpful. And sometimes if you've been injured, you're going to end up going to a doctor's office or going to a hospital, whatever. But sometimes they may come up with a diagnosis that might not always be as accurate as possible. With your 32 years of experience, you've run into this a few times, I would imagine.
I have. Usually it's not the diagnosis as much as the causation aspect of it that the doctors may not get accurate right off the bat. And a lot of times it's because they don't have all the information. They're there to diagnose and treat the condition as a general rule. So they may not ask the person all the questions to determine what caused the condition. If I have a lot of people who, older workers especially, you'll have some pre-existing issues taking place in your spine, for instance, and they go into the doctor looks at it, does some studies and says, yeah, you've got a bad back and you need to, surgery or whatever type of treatment that you need for that condition. And, they don't go into with the person what they did for work, how the back pain started type issues. And it can be, in Kentucky, you can have a pre-existing condition and it still can be considered work-related if it's aggravated by work activities. So if you've been going to a chiropractor for years for a back problem sporadically, going to a chiropractor, go in 2 or 3 times, you get better, and then a year later you have to go back in, you've done too much or whatever, and do that, and then you lift a heavy box at work and have a sudden onset of increased pain that doesn't go away like it has in the past with a couple of bouts of chiropractic treatment or physical therapy or something of that nature. Now they say, okay, you've got, this is a herniated disc in your back and you're going to need surgery. Well, sometimes the doctor said, well, you've had back pain for, years, so this isn't work related. And that may be accurate to some extent, but in Kentucky, you can have even an active pre-existing condition that's made worse by the work-related injury, and it still be compensable and there'll be a workers' compensation claim as a result of that, and the medical and lost wages should be covered. The question then is, what percentage is it? So, and that's a question that doctors ultimately have to answer. It can be, I've got some going on where the person had a little bit of chiropractic treatment, maybe once, twice a year they'd go to a chiropractor. They had a job that was pretty physically demanding, and then their outside activities was they were a very active outdoor person. And occasionally their back would be stiff hurt, and they'd go get a chiropractic adjustment, and then everything be fine, and then same thing happened. But when I looked at the records, all the chiropractic treatment, the person had back pain. No mention whatsoever of leg pain. And, I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving anybody medical advice whatsoever here, but one of the classic symptoms of a pinched nerve in the low back, as I understand it anyway, is pain traveling down the path of the nerve called radiculopathy. And so the person, after this event, lifting at work, and then they had a sudden onset of sharper back pain, more severe back pain, but also pain going down into the leg. And an MRI showed that now they had a herniated disc that was impinging a nerve and had to have surgery, and that was determined to be 100% compensable in regard to what the surgery and the pinched nerve, because even though they had pre-existing back issues, there was no evidence of a ruptured disc beforehand. So everything associated with that ruptured disc is 100% compensable. There's no carve out for pre-existing because that was not that wasn't a ruptured disc. Wouldn't have never required surgery for them for what they were having going on. And so, you have those situations to where the person has some pain beforehand, but then there's a significant change in the severity and the location of the pain, and that can be a sign that they've had a distinct new injury, even though they had pre-existing issues in that area before. And then you have situations where that it can be a dormant condition. So you go into you lift something at work, you go into the doctor says, well, yeah, but these problems that you have, you have what's sometimes referred to as a slip disc, the spondylolisthesis, and that didn't just occur at work. That's been progressing over time, and so this pre-existed the work injury. Well, in Kentucky, it's very clear that if you have a pre-existing condition that's not painful, not causing you any problems whatsoever, you didn't know you had it, and then you have a work injury that brings it into disabling realities, the legal term, makes it painful is the layman's term for it, that causes it to hurt and causes you to seek medical treatment because it was dormant beforehand and now it's disabling now because of the work injury. That is also 100% compensable under the workers' comp law. There's no carve out for the dormant pre-existing condition in that situation. Another pre-existing that you get into, like I said earlier, I think I mentioned an active condition. And if you have an active condition, if you go to the doctor, you're having some back issues, you go in and they say, yeah, you've got disc bulging and you've got a herniation, but it's not bad enough to need surgery now. And then you lift something heavy at work and now you need surgery. Or you have a hernia that's not surgical and you lift something and the hernia gets worse and now you need surgery. That certainly can be compensable in that setting. What would happen is there would be a carve out for what was the active condition beforehand. So if in Kentucky, as I think we've mentioned in episodes in the past, an impairment rating is one of the things you have to get permanent disability benefits. So if the doctor says your impairment rating is 15%, 5% pre-existing active, 10% due to the work injury, then you get compensated for the 10%, not the 5% that was pre-existing and active before the work injury occurred.
And how does that affect the injured worker if they've got, let's say, 15% impairment, they're only going to be compensated for a 10% impairment. That means they're going to receive less money in terms of the ongoing workers' comp benefit payment. Is that correct?
In regard to the permanent disability aspect of their injury, the payment of the medical would not change. The medical associated with treating the work injury is 100% compensable. And
just because you can tie it back to a work situation.
Yes, that treatment comes back to the work injury, and even though there's an active condition, it was made worse, and the treatment for being made worse is because of the work injury. I have had some where the person was taking a pain medication beforehand, and then they had to increase it afterwards, and the pain medication becomes the same, and then when it goes back to baseline, for to use that term, after treatment, and things go back to normal and then they're back on the same dose, then they don't want to cover the medication anymore because it's back to baseline, and we can deal with those situations from there. But normally the medical is going to be covered from the work injury on for at 100% in that setting, or until at least it goes back to baseline. And the temporary total disability, the benefits you're off when you're off work under doctor's orders before you reach maximum medical improvement, you get 100% of that as well from there. So it's not 1/3 of this is pre-existing, so you only get so your off work benefits of temporary total disability are cut by 1/3. That's not what it is. You still get 100% of the temporary total. It really only affects the permanent disability aspect of the claim.
Perfect. And again, we say this quite often on this podcast, but you've got 32 years of working with workers' compensation claims throughout the state of Kentucky. You've seen a lot of claims. You've obviously worked on behalf of a ton of clients over the years. You're able to kind of spot these little abnormalities to go, wait a minute, I don't think we ought to just assume the doc is 100% on point at this time. There could be other factors that he or she needs to consider, and you're able to kind of get that back into the claim, correct?
Correct. Able to get it back into the claim from that standpoint. Another one where I see this much more frequently, if somebody's at work, they usually tell the doctor, yeah, this, I was at work and, I've had back pain, but then I was at work and I lifted and I had sudden onset of increased pain in my leg, like that one client had. And that kind of goes to the doctor. They get that because the people, when the doctor says, what happened, they tend to say that type of stuff. Where you really see it where it's not addressed as much as it should be addressed is when the person has quote unquote arthritis. And you go into the doctor and the doctor looks at your back and says, well, yeah, you've got, or looks at your knee, we'll use that one, and you've got a lot of arthritis developing in that knee, cartilage wearing away, etc. in that knee, and this is just, and they don't associate it with being a part of the work activities. But then when I talk to the client and I say, well, what are your activities? And they say, well, I've got to squat quite a bit and lift heavy weights, and I'm carrying weights a lot when I'm working, and I'm on concrete all day long, standing, walking on concrete, etc. And I said, well, does the doctor know that? And he said, well, no, I didn't talk to him about my job duties. And I said, well, talk to him about your job duties and see if your arthritic condition is worse because of your work activities. That, somebody comes in to my office that's, relatively healthy person, weight's not, weight's normal, not excessive or anything of that nature, and they're 35, 40 years old and they got severe arthritis in their knee, that's not normal aging. 35-year-old normally does not have severe arthritis in the knee, but if they do a job that requires them to put a lot of stress on their knees as part of that job duties, then that certainly can cause the arthritis to develop much more quickly than what it does, and then that can be compensable. You see this quite a bit with truck drivers, riding in the truck and bouncing and having that develop in their back quite a bit. And so, you got to let the doctor have the entire picture. Again, I won't mention the factory name, but there's a factory here locally that I've represented several people who've had shoulder injuries from that. Frequently it is because of a specific incident of going overhead and they have a sudden onset of pain. But a lot of those workers as well that have the shoulder problems and may have a rotator cuff tear. But when I get the records and get the imaging studies, they have significant arthritis in that shoulder because they're doing, they're lifting heavy weights over their head frequently at work, and that wears their shoulder out. And then there's some who's come in that just says, it just kind of gradually come on, and I talk to them about work activities and say, did you talk to your doctor about those work activities? I said, no, it never come up. I just told them it just gradually come on over time. And, it just kind of started aching and just kept worsening and worsening. I said, well, tell the orthopedic doctor when you see him, these are what my work activities are. And then just point blank ask him, do you think these played a role in me having the arthritis that I do have in my shoulder? And, sometimes they say no, but frequently they say, yeah, that certainly would explain why you have arthritis much greater than what I would normally see in someone your age.
Yeah, it's a bunch of new information that the doc didn't have.
Exactly, and that's where the issue comes in, is it just not, a lot of times the doctor just isn't given the information. Sometimes the doctor just doesn't know to make the connection and make to do that, or he just didn't even ask, "Is this work related or not?" But frequently, it's the doctor doesn't have all the information, and once they get that additional information, yeah, that explains it. I didn't know why you had arthritis so bad, but that explains why your arthritis in your shoulder is much worse.
Well, I know in previous episodes we've talked about, when you go to the actual hearing and you and your client are in front of the administrative law judge and this kind of their day in court for this claim, so much of this is based on the medical records. And once the doctor in his or her notes are able to actually document, yeah, there's a good chance, or hey, yes, this was most likely caused by work activities, kind of makes your job a little bit easier, I would think.
Yes, especially when you have the treating doctor explaining that this is work related and this is why it's work related. If we got, there's some treating doctors who just don't want to get involved in litigation. And so in those situations, a lot of times we may have to go to a medical expert just for a one-time evaluation to get that opinion from there. But the majority of time, I tried to get the treating doctor's opinions on that issue. And sometimes you just got to give them that information. There's been times that, it's been frankly, even after surgery, that I've written to the doctor and says, this is what my client, and usually I have the client sign a statement explaining what their job duties are, send it to them and say, my client's job required repetitive use of their hands at work using guns and the air tools and power screwdrivers, etc., torque wrenches and things of that nature. And is the problem that you diagnosed in their wrist that you've done surgery on, was that at least in attributable to the work activities, and if so, do you think it was approximate cause or significant cause of it, and then get that response back. And frankly, there's been cases where that I've had where it was the workers' comp denied it early on because the doctor didn't relate it to that, and then we get that letter and get into litigation, and then they finally say, yeah, they send it out to their doctor, and their doctor says, yes, these work activities did make it worse, and we've been able to resolve several claims like that. So.
And that makes sense. But again, so much of it comes down to that medical record. So you've got to communicate directly with your doctor and let them know, this is everything. They're going to focus in on the medical side. Hey, okay, what are you feeling? How's this? If I raise this, do you feel pain? You've got to kind of get the other part of the story into the conversation.
Correct. I mean, from a pure medical standpoint, if you have a rotator cuff tear, the treatment for that's going to be, it doesn't matter what caused the tear, the treatment's going to be essentially the same. From that, at least that's my understanding. Again, not giving medical advice. But a rotator cuff tear is treated kind of the same. If it's surgical, then surgery. If it's not surgical, you try to treat it non-surgically, depending on the severity. But if it's caused by work activities, it's caused by something at home, doesn't really change how it's treated from a medical standpoint. So, from what the doctor is primarily focused on, which is to get you better medically, they gather all the information they need to do that. The other side of it, and they're wanting to get you to the best medical, physical position that you can be. I come in on it because even though I've spoken on these podcasts multiple times, I have short-term and long-term disability because some things do happen at home, and it's not going to be covered by workers' comp, and you're not going to have any lost wage income if you don't. But one of the things I do is if we can get it to be work-related, then I can, if it is truly work-related and the doctor says that, then we can get them the workers' comp benefits, the temporary total disability while they're off work, and then potentially permanent disability benefits, if depending on the severity of the injury, which will help go because workers' comp only pays 66 2/3, so that permanent disability benefits helps to reestablish their savings and put a little bit more into it as well.
That makes a lot of sense. So, Jeff, so far we've talked about pre-existing conditions that were aggravated by a work-related issue. We've talked about arthritis, and it could be a repetitive motion or a cumulative trauma type injury. Once again, that could be work related. Um, let's transition to this. It's when the doc says, "Well, you know what? This may just be part of the aging process. Maybe it's just part of getting older. These aches and pains are natural. Maybe you've got some degenerative disc disease or something like that, and it's just part of the game. And there's not much. There's not much there. When actually it could be work related."
Exactly, and that's the thing where we kind of, or all of these kind of come into that same umbrella from there. But like degenerative disc disease, some doctors, I've had clients come into me and say, "Well, yeah, the doctor said I got arthritis," and then I get the record and then they diagnose degenerative disc disease. So sometimes that can be used interchangeably. It seems like, at least in what they, and I think it's easier to explain to the client arthritis, they understand that, versus degenerative disc disease to some extent. But any degenerative condition that develops over a period of time, again, it's kind of like the arthritis that we talked about. If you do an activity repeatedly, it can make it worse. I mentioned truck drivers. Degenerative disc disease is what I frequently saw with truck drivers, over where their discs just wore out to the point that, because they're driving over the road so many, and I think with air ride seats, hopefully it's better now. Than I don't see it as frequently as I used to anyway. But the riding over the road, the bouncing and all of that was just really hard on their back, and they would wear their lower back out frequently. And most of the time, the doctors didn't pay any attention to what caused it. From there, but when they find out that they are an over-the-road driver, and there were medical studies done, talked about the incidence of degenerative disc disease in those drivers was greater, and we were able to go back in and show, yes, the work activities over a long period of time wasn't one specific incident; it was the work activities over a long period of time that caused their degenerative disc disease, or at least made it worse than what it would have been with just normal aging process. And it's, again, it just comes back to making sure the doctor has all the information to answer the question. A lot of times they just don't have that information to make that final determination. And essentially, if you are middle-aged and you have a problem with a joint, and it's a joint that you use a lot in your work activities, then that's something you need to talk to the doctor about. So if you have a job where you're doing a lot of overhead lifting and using your arms up over your head a lot, and you've got a shoulder issue, talk to the doctor. If they say it's arthritis or degenerative tear or something of that nature, talk to the doctor about it and say, could my activities be the reason, work activities be the reason I have this problem? If it's your wrist, and you have to have surgery on the carpal bones or something of that nature, ask the doctor. This is what I do at work. I'm having to. If you tap a lot, that can cause carpal tunnel syndrome. Or if you're doing a job at a factory where you're using these air guns and torque wrenches and all of that, where the wrists are getting a lot of twisting motions done to them because of what you're having to do, ask the doctor just point blank, is my work activities responsible in part for my problems? From that standpoint, and the same if if you've had issues before, but you had a sudden onset of different, if you, like I'd mentioned earlier, the low back, if you'd had some low back pain, but then you lift something and have significant increase in back pain and pain going into a different area than it has been, or if it's always been on the right side and now it's on the left side, that could be a completely new injury that needs to be addressed. But if the doctor says, yeah, you've had back pain and now it's just gotten worse, well, it got worse because of this lifting this box and did lifting that box cause this problem, and let the doctor have all that information. And once they get all the information, they should be able to and they can then make an informed decision on whether it is or it's not work related, and then let you kind of know which way to go. And if you have any questions about it, then you can always set up an appointment with myself or another workers' compensation attorney to go in and talk to them about it to see if there's something else if you can look at somewhere else to get an opinion if your treating doctor won't give you an opinion.
Well, and it's, as you said in the past, you were just mentioning stuff about the spine as well and joints. The spine is one big series of joints, and people forget to kind of think of it that way.
I agree, and that's what I tell clients frequently when I'm talking about the spine. Is I will tell them the spine is essentially one long joint, and it's and I usually tell them, especially when they're talking about doing a fusion surgery or something of that nature, and when I'm talking to them, I say, the disc that they're going to be removing it's not only a spacer, it's a shock absorber.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they do the fusion, they're changing that anatomy some, and the doctor's already gone through what they're going to be doing with them. I don't go into that aspect, but I do talk to them about how that's going to affect them in some regards. A lot of times, they, especially if it's somebody who does really, really heavy lifting type work and they're having 2-level fusion, then I think you might want to be thinking about a career change or something of that nature. And we need to plan now, because we don't want, when the doctor releases you, if he says you can no longer go back to lifting 50, 60 pounds, and then you don't have any options, we don't want to wait 9 months to be making those plans. Let's start planning that out now. So, those are things that come in from there. I know we're getting off topic.
No, but it makes sense. I mean, if you're in construction and suddenly you have a weight limit on what you can lift, I mean, that's going to impact your ability to do the job.
Correct.
If you're in roofing, I mean, I've lugged shingles up a ladder trying to get to a roof. That's a young man's job. And if you can't lift that weight, again, that's going to affect your ability to do that job, and you may get let go because of something like that.
True, and I'm like you. When I was younger, I packed 80-pound bundles
Yep.
of shingles up a ladder up to the roof, and about the time I quit's when they come out with those little conveyors that take them up there for you. And the first time I saw one of them, I thought, where was that when I was 16?
Well, I used to work on a horse farm, and we'd bale hay, and then suddenly, every once in a while, the farmer would bring out that little lift that I could actually put the hay bales on to get them up in the chute. I was like, it's a lot easier, isn't it? Thanks for waiting till the end of the day. That was always worth a good chuckle from them.
I never had a farmer that had that. I hauled a lot of hay too. We had to throw them up there.
It wasn't bad when it was the first few bales, when it's piled high on the back of the wagon, but as it gets lower and you get tired, you get more and more tired. Now you're throwing it up higher. Bring out the conveyor. That was a real big help, or we're going to be here all night. But no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Jeff, let me let the listeners know. This was kind of a compilation of a number of different situations that you might want to be considering having more of a conversation, more detailed conversation with your physician. If you want to go back and listen to some specific information about these, there are a few episodes I'm going to reference for you. If this is dealing with a pre-existing condition, go back and check out episode 30, and I'll put a link in the show notes directly to that. It's focused specifically on that topic. And likewise, as we get into old age and different things like that, episode 31 talks about cumulative trauma, which is a repetitive motion disease, repetitive motion injury. That may give you some additional information and some insights. Jeff's done a really good job of kind of breaking down all these topics to make it very, very easy to understand and very easy to kind of go, now I understand what's going on. Now I can ask my doctor, the next time I see him, or if I need to make an appointment to go see him. Jeff, when it comes to actually getting an attorney engaged for the workers' compensation situation, you have offices. We're here in Calloway County. We're in Murray, but you've also got an office up there in Hopkinsville in Christian County.
Yes, I've got an office in Hopkinsville. I opened that office up in 2023, and so I meet clients at that office as well. My primary office is here in Murray, but I do have that office. I use just one phone number, though. I think it makes it a lot easier to have just one phone number. So the way to reach me, if you want to reach me and set up an appointment either at my Murray office or my Hopkinsville office, is to call 270-753-0053. And you can reach out to us there, and we'll do what we can. As my office slogan is, we try to provide small town service and deliver big city results. So if you call the office, we will do the best to get you the answers that you're seeking.
Absolutely. Jeff, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time, and we'll be back here in about 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Take care, guy. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.